Thank you, Rob. And thank you very much for coming here. Thank you. I've come from California, from Pasadena, because I'm going to do a little bit of advertising here. If any of you in LA from till July the 28th, there is an exhibition of Abram Games at the Hoffman-Milken Center for Typography. I don't know if any of you know it, but that's in Pasadena, and it's called Artful Impact, and it's got Abram's posters and some working drawings, and it's a nice, it's not a huge exhibition, but it's a nice exhibition. If any of you are in London till the 24th of November, I didn't design this. There is a big exhibition at the National Army Museum in Chelsea of Abram's war work. And Abram, well, I'll talk about Abram's war work, but it's a huge exhibition, and it's just only talks about his war work. So there's a few leaflets here if you're in London. And if you are in London and you come, will any of you be in London, do you think? You will? Oh, okay. So contact me through abramgames.com. Tell me where you come from. If you're more interested in Abram's work, you can come and look at my archive. I'll drag it out from under the bed. And I'll give you a ticket for the exhibition. I can't say I'll take you, but you're very welcome. You could take a but ignore this design. Really bad. I wasn't allowed to do anything. How long can I talk for? Because that's okay. So I don't know if any of you know my father's work. No, you guys do, but any of you guys. But so my father was the son of emigres. They came, his parents came from Russia and Poland in 1904, and they were very poor. And my grandfather was a photographer, and he had a little shop, and he opened up a photographic studio, and he painted bar mitzvah boys and children and weddings, and the family lived above the shop, and Abram lived in the attic room, which was also the dark room. And it was there that my father learnt to use the tool that would be the most significant tool of his life, and it's the airbrush. And afterwards, I will pass around another of Abram's airbrushes, all the way from London. I don't know if any of you have used an airbrush. Shall I pass it around now? Okay, so pass it. So this is am I talking to designers? So you know what an airbrush is, and so I won't have to explain that, because sometimes when I talk to students, they haven't a clue. They think it's a little icon on the top of it. So I put them right. So this is Abram's 1918 airbrush that his father gave him for his bar mitzvah. Most people get cars, but my father got an airbrush. So he helped his father in the photographic studio, and he left school at 15, and the headmaster said to him, "What are you going to be?" And he said, "I'm going to be a poster artist." And the headmaster laughed at him and said, "Huh, you're rubbish. Why don't you become a bank manager?" And Abram said, "No, I'm going to prove you wrong." And later on, the headmaster had to apologize to him and said, "You were wrong." So he knocked down a cherry tree in the backyard and built himself a shed, a wooden shed, and started to work on a portfolio of work. And this is an unpublished piece of work he did. And when he died, I went through all his work, and I hadn't seen this beautiful piece of work before. And I took it to the post office, and I said, what can you do with this piece of artwork? It's beautiful. Look, you can make a poster out of it. And they said, oh, no, far too modern. 1935. But he's using the airbrush, and he's beginning to formulate a motto for himself, entitled Maximum Meaning, Minimum Means. And it's something that he would always work to. That was his rule. You had to keep things as simple as possible. And you all know what posters were like in the 1930s. They were just illustrations with a bit of text at the bottom. Not these posters, Rob, they're beautiful, these posters. But mainly advertising posters were illustrations, text at the bottom. But Abram had an idea to incorporate text and image. So you can see what he's doing. These are unpublished pieces of work. Of course, he was very influenced by your American Edward McKnight Cowper. He collected Cowpers all his life. This one's by Cowper. And he was also influenced by the 3 C's of poster design, Paul Collin, Cassandra, and Jean Carlou. And then he was influenced also by the British Austin Cooper. They used the airbrush, of course. But Abram was going to do much better work than they did. So he persuaded his parents, who were very poor, they had to pay, to send him to St. Martin's School of Art in London. He was there for 2 terms and decided he hated art schools, and he vowed that none of his children will ever go to art school, and we really had to fight to get to art school. My brother got to art school when he was 40. I managed to fight my father, and I got there. He left St. Martin's after 2 terms because he thought that the students were more talented than he was, and they were copying from each other, and he couldn't afford art materials. So he thought, I'll teach myself. So he would go to the Royal College of Surgeons and draw bits of cadavers. He learnt every single muscle and bone in the body, and he drew and he drew and he drew, and he thought that drawing would be the key to being a successful artist. It was the 1930s and times were hard, so he thought that he would help with the income of the family. And he hawked his portfolio around, and he got a job in a commercial art studio. There was no such term as graphic design studio. It was always commercial art. And he got this job and the boss, Mr. Askew, looked at his work and said, what can you do? And my father said, you can see what I can do. He had this big portfolio of work. And Askew said, I don't understand this work. It's rubbish. I don't understand this work. Tell me what you can do. Why should I employ you? And Abram said, well, I can use the airbrush. So he said, okay, I'll hire you as an airbrush artist. And for 4 years, Mr. Askew kept trying to fire my father. There are all sorts of stories there that I won't go into now. But one day, 4 years later, my father, a terrible show-off, was lining up 4 studio chairs in the studio, and he said to all his friends, watch me. And he started to jump over these 4 chairs, just like we saw today. We saw this guy in the wharf jumping over 4 Corps volunteers, and he did it. It was amazing. So my father was doing the same, but as he was in midair, Mr. Askew came in and said, Games, you're fired, out. He thought that my father was a terribly disruptive presence, and he was too revolutionary and too arrogant. And so my father went home to his mother, who was a nice Jewish mother, and he said, Mr. Askew's fired me. And she said, oh, you better go and apologize. And he said, I will never apologize. From now on, I will never work for anybody again. I will be my own master and my own slave. And by the way, I forgot to tell you that when he was always very keen on using the airbrush, so he always signed his checks with the airbrush. That was he was the chef. He had no job after being fired. He was very proud of being fired. So he went to see Ashley Havenden, who was a commercial art director, And Ashley Havenden looked at his work and said, it's good work, but I don't know what to do with it. It's ahead of its time. It's 10 years ahead of its time. And Abram said, I can't wait 10 years. So Ashley Havenden, who remained a great friend of Abram's, and he was a great designer, Ashley said to Abram, look, I'll send you to a friend of mine called Frank Mercer, who's the editor of Art and Industry. Do you collect Art and Industry? Do you have Art and Industry here? They're really, that was the magazine of the printing trade and the graphic design trade then. So this copy of Art and Industry gave Abram a double-page spread with this published. This was a prize-winning poster that he won 25 Guinness for this one. That's 25 pounds and 25 shillings. And it was. They thought this poster was far too Russian. It looked too much like a Russian constructor, this poster. And so you can see these are his unpublished pieces of work. And it says, fitting posters to the product. This is the work of a great young designer. So Abram bought 70 copies of this magazine. There were no photocopiers in those days, of course. He bought 70 copies and hand wrote 70 begging letters to the patrons of the poster. And actually I have his rough of the begging letter. He wrote it down in an exercise book, and I have that. And says, please give me some work. A few months later, the phone rang, and our great Frank Pick said to Abram, from London Transport, I don't know if you know London Transport's history of posters, but Frank Pick was the guy who rebranded London Transport. He was an amazing person. And Frank Pick was a visionary, and he got Abram to come to London Transport. And he says, I've seen your double-page spread in Art and Industry, and it's rather good work. I think I'll give you a try. So Abram got his first commission for London Transport. And after he died, I had to go through all his work, and I found these two pieces of artwork, and they're airbrush pieces of artwork, and I fell in love with them, and I took them to London Transport, and guess what London Transport said? Far too modern, can't use them. Anyway, after he got the piece of work from the great Frank Pick, the phone never stopped ringing, and he's beginning to do what a lot of designers do in those days. He uses a lot of hands because it conveys so many messages. It's very useful. And I think the Stack Safely poster he did for ROSPA, for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, I think that sums up his axiom of maximum meaning, minimum means. Keep it very simple. You don't need any text. He didn't like putting text, and I hate to. Are you typographers here? Yeah. Abram hated hand lettering. You know, and in those days you had to do everything with a ruling pen, and he didn't have the patience for it. He really didn't like hand lettering. And so he wanted to keep the lettering to a minimum. Spanish Civil War happened in 1939, and Abram decided that he would do his bit. And he produced these two posters that, they aren't great posters, but he was very proud of the fact he didn't charge for them. And he was a lifelong socialist, and he's using his airbrush there. By the time he'd been called up into the army in 1940, 24 posters had been published. And he was a great portrait painter, and this is a self-portrait he did of himself in his brand new uniform, looking rather arrogant, I must say. So he went to the office to get his commission, and they looked at they looked through his papers, and they said, Games, we see that you're a poster designer, so we want you to go and draw maps. And Abram said, hate drawing maps. And then they said, okay, well, how about the medical corps? Abram said, can't stand the sight of blood. And then the guy said, how about cook? can't cook. What about driver? And Abram said, I can't drive. And the guy behind the desk said, look, I'm trying to save you from fighting. I don't want to send you to the front line because, quite frankly, you'd be quite useful to us if you could draw maps. And Abram said, please send me off to the infantry because this is a war I believe in. And I'm a Londoner, I'm Jewish, and I want to go fight like everybody else. So they sent him off to the infantry. And while he was in the barracks were covered with dark brown creosote. And on the walls of the barracks were tiny little typed out charts saying, look after your weapon, and if you don't, kapow. And no one was taking any notice of these little diagrams on the walls. And Abram began to think, well, wouldn't it be nice to have an art gallery on the wall? Wouldn't it be nice for a bit of colour? Wouldn't it be good if soldiers had something they could look at and appreciate, and telling them about things that they needed to know? And he began to formulate an idea, and he typed up 2 foolscap pieces of paper, which is in the exhibition at the National Army Museum, the actual piece of paper. And he entitled it Army Poster Propaganda. And he took it to his superiors, and they said, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Put it away. And Abram heard no more. So he went back to his unit and just was an infantryman. And then one day he was summoned to Whitehall. These are beautiful drawings he did of soldiers while he was in the barracks. Darning socks, writing home. They're really lovely drawings. And then he was summoned to Whitehall, and they said to him, we know that you're a poster designer, and we need a poster designing for the Royal Armoured Corps. And Abram said, yes, I can do this poster, but I have no equipment, I have no tools, I have no airbrushes. So they said, well, what's happened to them? And he said, my parents' house has been bombed and everything's been probably looted, because when a house was bombed, it was looted. So they took him round to the house in Whitechapel in London, and in the basement, nobody had wanted to steal airbrushes. So the airbrush that someone's holding there was Abram's airbrush from his childhood, really. So 3 airbrushes he had, and his easel, and he got everything over to the War Office, again in an attic, and he started a studio. And this is the first of 100 posters he did for the army. And then, has anyone seen this poster? You have seen, or you have seen it, but anyone, where have you seen it?
Books. Maybe
Books, but not in films. Because in a lot of war films, you see this poster in the background. She is a very notorious poster. She's called the Blonde Bombshell. So Abram's at work in his attic studio, and he's drawing maps. In the end, he had to draw maps. And he's designing cap badges, and he's doing book jackets, and everything for the army. And he's drawing away, and there's a knock on the door, and this woman walks in, this young girl, in the uniform of the Auxiliary Territorial Services. And this girl says to my dad, I need a poster designing for the ATS Amateur Dancers Theatre Drama Society. And Abram said, there's a war going on. I'm not going to design silly posters. Get out. And this poor woman walked out. And as she was leaving, my father looked around and looked her up and down and thought she was rather a corker, in his words, and said, look, I'm terribly sorry, come back in. And they remained friends throughout their lives. And she posed for his poster in this new uniform, the new hat. It's called a fore and aft hat. And she posed for him, and he designed her amateur dramatics dance poster. And so this poster went up to the public, and the girls were queuing around the block because nobody wanted to join the ATS before because it had a really dowdy, unsexy uniform. It was miserable. It was khaki. Our Queen was in the ATS. If you've seen a picture of her during the war, she's wearing this frumpy, khaki, belted uniform. And the girls just weren't interested in joining up. And so the girls, this poster was the most successful recruiting poster of the war, and they joined up in their droves. And then a conservative, it has to be conservative, MP called Thelma Caslett saw this poster, and for 5 weeks in Parliament, while there was a war going on, she discussed this poster. And she said, our girls should be attracted into the army through patriotism and not glamour. And she's wearing far too much lipstick. How dare you do a poster like this? This is not what our girls should be about. Which was crazy, because Abram thought, why can't girls look glamorous if they're in the ATS in the war? And actually in the ordnance factories, women had to wear makeup. And why can't she look like a movie star? You know, he thought it was crazy. Anyway, guess what? She was banned and pulped. And if you go to Pasadena, there is a copy of this on show, and it's a very rare poster. Anyway, Abram was working away in the War Office, and he said to his superiors, look, a year ago, I wrote a memorandum entitled Army Poster Propaganda. Can you go and find it? And they dug it up, and they looked at it, and they said, well, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you 6 months free trial to design the kind of posters that you think are necessary for the army. And if the experiment doesn't work, you go back to your unit. And Abram said, fantastic. Thank you. And so he embarked on the first time that army poster propaganda happened. I mean, there was propaganda, but not for internal use in the army. So he would think of a poster. He thought that soldiers weren't clean enough, because if they, you know, all sorts of illnesses happened if you didn't shower regularly. These were young men who'd only just left home. And you have to look after your weapons, and you can't talk in the war. And so he began to produce these posters. And he had a lot of restrictions because there was a paper supply problem, and there was rationing. There was a rationing of metal-based printing inks. And the posters were printed very small, sometimes on recycled paper, sometimes on the back of others. They were printed at first by chromolithography. I'm sure you all know what that is. And then by photolithography, as the chromolithographers enlisted into the army. And because he was using his airbrush, he managed to make the paint go much further. And he managed to produce beautiful colours. You can see how wonderful those colours are, you know, fighting fit. It's beautiful. And so he was now on a roll, and the experiment went very well. And he was given an unprecedented free hand, and he was so happy that no one told him what to do. He was thrilled to bits. But he also, apart from doing all the research, he was his own copywriter. He had to do all the hand lettering, and some of it's bloody awful if you look closely enough. The spacing's pretty off. He also went and oversaw the printing of it. He was the son of a photographer, so he liked to have fun with photography, although he wasn't into photography very much. So he was asked to design a poster by MI6, who were the military detective, MI5, MI6, I don't know if you know what it is. And they said to him, we want you to design a poster for radar. And Abram said, what's radar? It was a new thing. What's radar? Oh, you just twiddle some knobs. We can't tell you anything more. You just twiddle these knobs. So more hands here. Notice all the hands all over the place. And notice that the colour is changing because of the printing restrictions. So it's mainly just black tones and the spotting of red. And he did this poster for radio location, and he thought probably it looks a bit dull. So what does he do? Does anyone know what he does? Anyone have a clue how these stripes get there? Well done, well done. He had a Venetian blind in his studio, so he photogrammed through the Venetian blind, and that's it. And then the soldiers were cleaning their rifles and chatting and not bothering to unload them. And things happened. So he wanted to do a poster so that they would look out, you know, be very careful when they were using their poster rifles. So he wanted to design a poster through the barrel of a gun. He wanted to use the barrel of a gun. And he couldn't work out how to do it. And he's experimented and experimented. And then a friend of his came up with an idea. And he said, why don't we take your Lee Enfield rifle up on the roof of the War Office? It's a sunny day. And they covered the barrel of the gun with a tiny piece of cardboard and stuck a pin in it and exposed the light through the barrel of the gun. So this is actually the inside of a barrel of a gun. And he did this before Saul Bass did his, before 007. And we have the actual photographs of the barrel of a gun. And it's in the book that I gave Rob. So there was a Dig for Victory campaign for the public. And Abram thought it would be great around the barracks to dig around and grow vegetables. So he did these two really elegantly beautiful posters. Amazing colours for the war. But then you get to these ones, problem with inks, I guess. He understood the printing process really well. There were a set of 3 of these. I'm not going to show you the other one, but he called these the Symphony Macabre. Like a lot of designers then, he was very influenced by the Surrealists. There'd been a big exhibition at the National Gallery in London in 1936, and everybody was into Surrealism. So, you know, you design a poster, you put a few clouds around. But he's using his airbrush, and you can see another hand in there. He went into the barracks, and he noticed that the soldiers were tearing down the coffin poster. And he said, why are you tearing this coffin? Why are you tearing it down? And the soldier says, we hate it. We cannot live with it. It reminds us of our sisters, our daughters. It's just horrible. Instead of being upset by this, Abram was thrilled to bits. And he said, they noticed the poster, and that he thought that was a huge achievement. You didn't have to like the work, you just had to notice it. And job done, you know. Also, he never really liked using photographs, and you can see the influence here of John Hartfield. You know John Hartfield? But he's needing to use photographs here because precise identification was really important when it came to ammunition. So he would have photographs taken, and then he would embellish them with the airbrush. All hand-lettered. There was an exhibition of war posters at Harrods. Do you know Harrods, the shop in London? I've no idea why Harrods. But the War Office put on this exhibition, and a lot of designers during the war. Henryan, do you know Henryan? Tom Eckersley, Pat Keeley, a lot of the designers. Abram was only working for the army internally. The others were working for the Air Force. Robin Day, do you know Robin Day? But they were putting up their posters with drawing pins on the walls, no frames. Couldn't afford frames in those days. And the exhibition was opened by the Minister of Labour, and he was called Ernest Bevan, and he saw this poster, and he stood rigid in front of it, and then he started to tear it off the wall, and he just pulled it off the wall, and he rolled it up, put it under his arm, and Abram said, why is he doing that? He took this poster to Churchill, Churchill saw this poster and he went crazy. He said, this is distorted propaganda, this is disgraceful libel. We don't have rickets in England. And the little boy in the background has got rickets. And Abram had done his research and he knew that rickets was known as the English disease. And he had done his homework. And he was furious with Churchill and Churchill was furious with him. And the poster was banned and pulped. It's of Finsbury Health Centre, designed by Bertold Lebetkin, and it's still there. It's a beautiful little health centre. It's still going as a health centre. There's a lot of stories to a lot of posters, but I'm trying to be quite brief here. In 1944, Abram was asked to design a poster for the Royal Armoured Corps. And he said, I want to go and draw. Because drawing, he was still drawing all the time. He said, I want to go and draw from life. So they sent him off to join the unit of parachutists. And he spent a week with them and he took photographs and he drew and he designed his poster. The poster was printed. A few days after the poster was printed, Abram learnt that the whole unit had been killed in Arnhem. The whole lot had been killed. And he was really, really devastated. And he went to his superiors and he said, look, this is crazy. I want to go and fight. And please send me back to my unit. And they said, nope, you've got a job. And these were the words, you will bloody well get on and do it, Games. We can always replace a soldier, but we can never replace you. And that was a sort of source of pride for Abram. In 1942, Abram designed not only maps and book jackets and all sorts of things, but he designed 36 posters in 1 year. And they made him the only ever official war poster artist. So he was very proud of that. That was great. The colours, you can see how amazing the colours are. These are war posters. I know you've got Rosie the Riveter posters, and that's pretty good colour, but this is pretty good. So more hands here, and vote as serve as a soldier. We had a vote in England today. I don't know the result yet. We had a vote for European elections, and please don't mention the B word to me. It's a real mess, a real scandal. So my father was still drawing, still going to museums and galleries in his lunchtime. And one day there was a little exhibition of a painter called Graham Sutherland. I don't know if you know him. And he went into the gallery, and as he was coming out, this woman was going in. So being my father, he followed her into the gallery. Tiny little gallery, nice paintings, tiny little gallery. And this poor woman had Abram over her shoulder all the time, and I wish he'd leave me alone. And he was breathing down her neck. And then he said, do you like the work? And she turned round and she noticed he was in uniform, and she thought this was Graham Sutherland, the artist. And she said, yes, I do. And he said, would you like to see some more? And she said, yes, okay, I will, because it was great, because an artist invites you to see his etchings. So he said, well, come round the corner. So he noticed that she had an accent, and she had a German accent. And he said, you cannot go into the War Office with a German accent. So when you sign the book, sign it Miss Smith. So he took her up to the attic studio, and on the easel was this poster. And 6 months later, they got married. That's my mum. And he hid her name in the poster. So this is my mum's poster, and her name's in there. But I had an idea that before my mum, you know, what did he do? So I went with a magnifying glass to a lot of the posters that he before, and guess what? Little tiny names hidden. And it's actually quite awful, because in the exhibition in London now, the security guards have nothing to do but go round and they keep finding signatures, and they keep saying to the curator, who is this one and who is that one? And I said, I'm not telling. I had an email just now asking me. 1945. Abram was working in the War Office, and below him in the film unit was a guy called Paul Rother. I don't know if you know Paul Rother. He was a documentary filmmaker. And Paul and Abram became great friends. And Paul said to Abram one day, look, Abram, you better come and see what I've just come back from Germany with. And Abram saw the wet footage of Bergen-Belsen Holocaust victims. Paul had just been and filmed the victims of the Holocaust. The British Army had just gone in, and Abram never got over that, and he just couldn't believe, you couldn't believe what you saw. I mean, we know it now, but then it was, you just didn't know. And he thought, I'm going to go and do something. So he volunteered, and he taught people to go and treat the victims of the Holocaust. He wanted to go himself, but he wasn't allowed because he was still in the army. So he taught them how to look after the victims of the Holocaust. And he designed the badges, and he took the volunteers on camps. And then he designed these 3 posters gratis. And of course, they're not posters that you put on your wall for very long, but they did the job, and people were haunted by these posters. And they were very effective, although not very nice. But now we're coming out of the war. Thank God. And Abram was working for London Transport. And these are very strange posters. He called them the bowing tickets. They're beautiful, but they're very weird. Posters after the war were very important because they were covering the bomb sites. They had huge posters, huge hoardings covering bomb sites. And Abram wanted to continue the kind of posters that he was doing in the army, because he wanted his posters to be a power for good. He didn't want to join the commercial world. He didn't want to sell products. He wanted to sell services. He wanted to teach, and he wanted to educate. So these kind of posters were very, very important to Abram, and that was the kind of work he wanted to do. And it's strange because although they were printed, they were designed 2 years apart, they somehow go together. A lot of his work you can put together like these two. Also, posters for the power of good and more hands. Abram was the first person to put VD on a poster. In the war, the Ministry of Health said, we need a poster for venereal disease. I know a lot of young people don't know what that is, but in those days it was venereal disease. And they said, please do a poster for venereal disease. And Abram put a VD on the poster. Oh, no, you can't do that. Why not? No, you can't put VD. And Abram was furious. He said, say what you mean. This is a poster against VD. Just put it on there. Say it loud. And he got away with it. In London, after the war, the government and the Council of Industrial Design decided to put on a nationwide festival called the Festival of Britain. They would call this the tonic of the nation, to the nation. I don't know if any of you are aware of the Festival of Britain. If you've been to London, on the South Bank in London, there's a festival hall, a Royal Festival Hall. That was there for the festival. It was designed for the Festival of Britain, and all around the South Bank in London were the Festival of Britain exhibits. If you were involved in the Festival of Britain, you were made. So Conran was involved as a young man, Hugh Casson, the architect. Anybody who worked in any shape or form on the Festival of Britain was sorted. It was a really important thing. The Council of Industrial Design invited 12 designers to design an emblem. It's not a logo, it's an emblem. Abram didn't like the word logo because it's a misnomer. If it has words, it's a logo. If it's a symbol, it's a symbol. It's not a logo. And at first he designed his symbol without any flags round there. And they thought it was too martial. It looked too much like a war poster. So when my father saw my mother hanging out the washing in the garden, he thought, that's a good idea, I'll hang out the washing. And he put the bunting round. And this symbol had to work large, it had to work small. It was everywhere in 1951, and I've written a book on that, the whole thing. He designed the catalogue covers. There were 6 of them in 6 different colours, and this was embedded into flower beds, this symbol, and it's still, if you go to Oxford Street, you can still see it on a building. I always get very proud when I see it. And it was on biscuits. And I have this tin of biscuits. I haven't tried to taste them, but they smell something awful. The whole tin of them. So my father had a lot of friends from school who were doctors and lawyers and surgeons. And one day he got a phone call from his surgeon friends. And they said, Abram, we've got something to show you, but you must never divulge what you're going to see. So they took him to a London hospital and they took him down to the morgue and they showed him this. It wasn't a photograph, it was the real thing, of his festival symbol. And Abram was thrilled to bits, delighted. And, okay, take a guess. Anyone have a clue what it's made from? Teeth? Sorry? No. No. Sorry? Bullets, no. It's a morgue. But, oh, well, that's true. That's true, but not that many. Could be. Anyone? Okay, shall I? 604 gallstones from one patient. She died. Poor woman. So I'm going to mention the B word. So Abram hated plagiarism and he hated people copying his work. But when I saw this on Twitter, I was so happy. It's beautiful, so good. I gave the designer of it, well, the fake designer of it, permission to produce it as a poster. So it's called the Festival of Brexit Britain. And this is what I think of Brexit. So that was done recently, right? And I think Abram would really have loved this. He was now Britain's greatest designer. He'd made it. And he was asked to enter a competition for the Olympic Games stamp. He designed a poster for the Olympic Games, and he also designed a stamp. And no designer in England is ever allowed to sign a stamp, right? But he got away with it. He's Olympic Games, and he was so proud that he got Olympic Games then. And then he was asked to enter a competition for the stamp design for the Festival of Britain. And thank God he won it, because if someone else had produced a stamp, well, they did. There was another winner, but if they had used his emblem on a stamp, he wouldn't have been happy at all. And King George happened to be facing to the left, and so did Britannia. And most of Abram's faces faced to the left. And I said to him once, why does everything face to the left? And he said, why do you think? So I think what we have, you see, these are the work from after the war now. We have in our archive, we have his working drawings, and they're hundreds of sheets of working drawings, and they are the most fascinating documents. You can see the thought process. If you're using a computer, you won't get these, you know, but in those days, everything was drawn. He said an idea has to work an inch high. Because if you see a poster, you see it at a distance. And if it doesn't work small, it will never work large. So everything he did was a tiny little thumbnail. He was still using his airbrush, and he was he designed a lot of posters for the British Overseas Aircraft Corporation. And in every BOAC poster, you had to use Lee Elliott's little speedbird emblem. And Abram managed to do this very effectively. And you can see for the festival, 1951, he used the elements of his design. He had the washing hanging out and the flags. And I remember him with a big stipple brush, and everything was drawn, was produced SS on the easel, flat artwork on thick card. Do you remember? I don't know if any of you are thick card. And he used to do the backgrounds like that. And he was a master of laying flat colour. It was extraordinary. And he also graded it. So in these you can see. And where is this? So someone from the National Army Museum, you've got the leaflet there, has ripped off this poster. Yeah. Yeah, you can see what he's done, and he's taken the arrow. So I think he was very influenced by this poster. But you can see the speedbird emblem in the negative space. They are beautiful posters. Now this one, Abram's goal was to design a poster without any text. And he got away with this, I think, until the British Rail said, no, you've got to put some text on. So I think he just plonked See Britain by Train at the top. But it doesn't need text, does it? It doesn't need it anymore. So I don't know if any of you guys ever been to Blackpool. Don't. It doesn't look as... Yeah, it does look fun. It's never that sunny. And I had to go to Blackpool. And I was really disappointed that the Blackpool Tower had no legs. And I always thought as a kid, because I grew up with this poster, that I was going to see an Eiffel Tower with legs. But no, it's stuck on top of a theatre. It doesn't have legs. I don't know if I've got... How much time have I got? I can go on. How much? Can I go on? Yeah, it's okay. You mind? Anyone got to go? Okay, so... Because all these posters have stories, which is why I've written so many books. So in 1951, because he won the Festival of Britain competition, he won 50 guineas, and it was copyright free, by the way. Because he won it, the phone never stopped ringing. There was no internet, but it was the phone in those days. And one day the phone rang, and Jersey Tourism phoned him up and said, Mr. Games, we'd like you to come over to Jersey because we want to win the Tattersall Tourism Trophy poster competition, and you're the man to do it. Can you come over? Lovely place, Jersey. It's a little island off the bottom of Britain. And he said, okay, and he went and met the mayor and corporation round the table. And they said, what we want is a poster of a girl lying on a beach in a bikini. Can you do it? And Abram said, I can do it. And he went back to London and produced his submission sketches were hand-rendered pieces with a black cardboard frame, and always this size. It was always about this size. And he showed his umbrella to the mayor and corporation. And they said, that's not a girl lying on the beach in a bikini. You said you could do a girl lying on the... And Abram said, I said I could, but I didn't say that I would. So tough. This is what you're getting. And they said, oh, no, it's not. That's not going to win it. We want a girl on the beach. And Abram said, too bad. If you don't like it, go and get another designer. This is what you're getting. And he had to fight. And guess what? It won the Tattersall Tourism Trophy poster competition. And it also, he designed 3 more posters. And I don't know if I've got the stamps here, but he also designed a set of stamps. So the last poster of Abram's to be printed by chromolithography, which I'm sure you guys know what that is. It's a really detailed, difficult, beautiful piece of... Anything here? Yeah, these would be chromolithography. So Abram designed this for the P&O ferries, Peninsula and Orient Line. And he wanted to see his last poster to be printed by chromolithography being printed, and the printers hated Abram. They didn't allow him in the print shop, really, because he used to take a cigar box full of colour swatches, which he never used a colour straight out of a wash tube. He always had to mix it. And he always made little swatches, and then he wrote little numbers, 1% this and 1% cyan and blah, blah. And he was very, very proud of his work, and he wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And he took his swatches to the printers. And when this came off the press, this Coit's deck poster, he couldn't speak. He said, "It is so beautiful. It is the most beautiful piece of printing. It's just extraordinary." And he was thrilled to bits. 1951, he was asked by the Financial Times to design a poster for the Financial Times. It was to be a new campaign. And so this, you can see how he's working here. So this is number 1, and he's got a man reading a newspaper, and then he thought, that's boring, someone's done that before. And so he's working away, and then he's got a little man newspaper. He designed 8 of these, and it was a very, very successful campaign. And he's still using his airbrush, and they are beautifully produced posters, and he was a master of technique, my father. He really was. I never appreciated him, but I grew up, because he worked at home, I never bothered to look at his work. But after he died, I had to deal with it, and I'm just amazed at how consistently good he is, actually. Being a bit biased here. He hated art colleges, but he had to earn a living. So 1 day a week for 7 years, he taught at the Royal College of Art. And some of his students became very good designers in their own right. And you can see that as a tutor, he's wearing a suit and a tie. I mean, they all did in those days. And he's was entering a competition for the first moving BBC ident. And I will show you a film of that later if we've got time. I've got it on here. And it's made from piano wire and brass, and he concocted it with the help of his students at the Royal College of Art. And you can see a photograph here. And it just lasted, it revolved around, and it lasted just enough time for them to film it. And then they put it on a loop, and then the whole thing collapsed. And that was that. And I'll show you later. But when he was at the Royal College of Art, there was a dance every week. And one day my mother went to the dance, and the students came up to my mum and said, "Mrs. Games, we're so pleased your husband comes once a week." And she said, "Oh, thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear." And they said, "No, if he came more often, we would all leave." He was a really tough tutor. He really worked them hard. He would come in the morning, he'd pin up a brief, he'd open all the windows, because everybody had to work in a very cold place, because you're all falling asleep. It's rather hot in here, actually. So when it's hot, you fall asleep. And he'd throw open all the windows, and he'd put the brief on the wall, and he'd say, "Right, you've got to have all your pieces up this in a week's time. And if you don't do it, if it's not there, you're out." He would take no prisoners, because he believed that the outside world is very tough. Students have to meet deadlines. And so he really worked them hard, and they were scared of him. But they respected him, because when they came into work, into the studio, they would see all his posters on London Transport, on the hoardings, and they really respected him. And all his students became very close friends afterwards. A lot of them didn't, but a lot of them did, and those were the good ones. So I'm going to show you a film of this, and this is a coffee maker. So Abram had to learn how to make a product. He taught himself how to. He was always learning, always curious and always learning. In later years, he became a crazy inventor, but that's another story. He invented a copying process, and then he invented a tiny little copying process that you could stick in your pocket and it would run without any electricity. And I cannot get that produced, but you don't need it now because you've all got mobile phones, so you don't need it. It's a shame. But he had patents out galore. So this is a coffee maker, and I will show you a film of the coffee maker. He made two. One was on show at the Festival of Britain, and this one was a later model, and it was made from stainless steel. And it makes a great cup of coffee. So when you come to my house, I'll make you coffee in it, if you like coffee. But no decaf, I don't do decaf. So you're doing book covers. I don't know if any of you have seen this. So in 1956, the director of Penguin Books, Sir Alan Lane, decided that you guys were bringing in colour covers. And Penguin Books were just boring typographical covers. And Alan Lane decided that it was about time that they would experiment and have colour covers, like American Pan books and, you know, the lurid covers that you've got. These are not lurid, but paperback books, you know, usually have very lurid colour. So he employed Abram to be the art director. So Abram designed a grid for Penguin Books, and he got his students at the Royal College of Art to design the covers. They designed 36 covers, and they all got paid the same, including Abram. And the experiment lasted a year until Sir Alan Lane decided that he hated them. They were crude, and he called them breast sellers, not best sellers, and you can see why, can't you? So that was that. It lasted a year. So if you're ever in a junk shop in London, and you can, if you ever find one of these books, then it's worth a lot. It's great. And the best present we could buy my father was one of these covers, or a Festival of Britain's emblem somewhere on a glass or on a. In fact, I'm just going to buy a Festival of Britain key. I mean, the Festival of Britain emblem appeared everywhere on the weirdest of things, on knickers and amazing things. So printing processes changed, of course, and American designers were bringing in to England their photographic posters. And Abram was travelling on tops of buses, and he noticed that his delicate airbrush posters were not standing up against your American Madman commercial posters. And he thought, I better change my style. So he hung up the airbrush and he picked up a paintbrush. And he really loved this because it afforded him more simplicity, more maximum meaning, minimum means. And we would come home from school and this poster would be on the easel. And he'd say, come in. And the kids, you weren't yet, I didn't know you then, but Wendy's an old friend of mine and we knew each other when we were kids, but not when this poster was done. But he'd come in and he'd say to the kids, all our friends, what does this mean? What is it? And we'd say, it's a 5. And then he'd say, and what else can you see? And we'd say, it's a glass of beer, perhaps. And he'd say, and what else can you see? Oh, sorry. And we'd say, it's a G. Daddy, I want to go out and play. And he'd say, no, you've got to tell me. If the children didn't understand his work, it wasn't simple enough, it wasn't maximum meaning, minimum means enough. So he would start again. And in this particular case, he said to the people who were sticking the posters up, it doesn't matter how much beer you drink, you can stick it any way you like. It just doesn't matter. And you can see his signature. His signature was really important to him. he starts off in the early days, pre-war, he signs himself Guess, G-E-S, never knew why, but I think that was a sort of puzzle, Guess, G-E-S, Games, Guess. Then as he gets into the army, he signs his name A Games R-E, Royal Engineers, that's the unit he was in. Then when he signs it A Games full stop. And he's signing it beautifully here, A Games, having fun. And he's always got this full stop after his signature. And when the kids understood his work, and this was on the easel, he'd put the full stop. Good, done, job done, great. So my father was dying, and we were all round his bedside, and we were drinking a lot of whiskey. And I said to him, Daddy, do you want a full stop on your gravestone? And he said, yes. And he's got one. So it's a very strange thing when you go into this Jewish cemetery, and my father designed a beautiful symbol, really, for my mother and him on a joint gravestone. And I don't know if you guys have seen Paul Rand's gravestone. Paul Rand and my father were great friends. And they were born in the same year, they died in the same year, and they both had wives called Marion. And they lived symbiotic lives, and they loved each other very much. There's a Paul Rand. And Paul Rand's got this rather good gravestone, but my father's also got a really good gravestone. And it says Abram Games, full stop on his grave. He'd be very pleased with that. And so his newspaper also changed style, and his girl on the beach in a bikini changed style. And here are the prize-winning stamps he designed for based on his posters. And guess what? The BOAC posters changed style as well. And keep it and tidy faces to the right. I don't know why that is. It shouldn't be like that. Silk screen printing, and much simpler, much simpler. Times posters, incredibly simple here. And he designed this poster for the Times with the bust. And people said to him, why is there a crack in the plinth? And he said, you'll see. And a week later, the Times had a strike, a big strike, and it changed the face of newspaper printing. And he said, I told you so. So he's also changing his style here. This is based on a stained glass window, an Irish tourism poster. And anyone have a clue who the client is for this horse? This is a poster that my father did manage to not have any text on, and it's extraordinary how he got away with it. I don't understand how he managed that, but he did. But there is text around the clock. It's the name of all his children around the clock, and the clock is Big Ben, of course. But anyone got a clue who the client is? It's London Transport, because can you see the harness? Can you see the little roundel of London Transport? How he got away with it, I don't know, but he did. And a lot of designers were asked to design the wall tiles for the new Victoria line, and Abram had Stockwell to design, and he did his research, and there was a pub called the Swan in Stockwell, so he based his design on a swan. And it's still there, and it's rather beautiful, but people say, what the hell is it? And Abram said, well, you've got to stand back from the platform, but I'd be very careful if I were you. Because you have to get a distance from it. But it's good. He also designed a lot of work for the Jewish community. About 1/5 of his work was for the Jewish community. And he designed this. It's not a stained glass window, it's made from coloured resin. And he taught himself how to do this. And it's in a synagogue, which is still, and the window's still there. And it's another hand, and it's a torn prayer shawl encased in barbed wire. And you can see the Star of David as well. And it's a very beautiful window, really. And then one day we came home from school and we went into his cold studio, and there was lino on the floor. And my father was on his hands and knees, and there was a big white sheet of paper, and he was dipping this calligraphy brush, Chinese calligraphy brush, into black Indian ink. And he was just going like this, and we were watching him. And we said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I don't know. I have no power over my hand. It's just, I have no control. It's just writing." And he stepped back and he started to cry. And we said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because this hand has just written the names of all the Holocaust memorial camps. The Holocaust camps, the concentration camps that were all listed there. And it was a Holocaust memorial panel for something. And it's a very stark, very simple piece of design. And he called it tear writing. And you can see he was very moved. He was really touched by that. This is the last poster he did for London Transport. And you can see how he's working. So he's thinking, he has a commission to design a poster for the zoo. And he's thinking, what shall I do? Shall I do a giraffe? Shall I do a zebra? And he thinks, no, I'll do a tiger. And so this is a tiger. And a few years ago, London Transport, who have an amazing archive of posters, by the way. If you're ever in London, go and see their posters. It was extraordinary. But London Transport celebrated 150 years, and they ran a competition for the public of what their favourite poster is. And they chose 150 posters. They've got millions of posters from London Transport. A lot of Edward McKnight Kauffer posters. But guess what? My father came second. He lost by 139 votes, and he could have come first, but he came second as the nation's favourite London Transport poster, and they turned him into a stamp as well. This is a rather unusual poster for Abram. He designed this for the Royal Shakespeare Company. A ghost. He designed this for the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's all of Shakespeare's plays, and I've just given Rob a little flip book that my father did of this poster. So you go flip through it, and all the plays come up. So he was often asked, what are your favourite posters? And he said, well, there are 3 posters I want to be remembered for. And this one from the war. Or is it this one? The talk spiralling out of control. This is another piece of plagiarism I found, and I thought my father would love this. It was great. This is allowed. This is, if you do it humorously, it's allowed. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know. I'm in the wrong country, I think. It works in London. This is it. And it's a self-portrait of Abram. And then this one that you have in your archive, this was a poster that for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And when Abram went to get his brief, they said to him, you've got to be a philosopher as well as an artist. And it rang in his head all the time. And this is a really important poster, and one that Abram was proud of, but actually nobody liked it because it's not something you put on your wall. You don't like it. It appeared in 4 languages and 4 colours. So we're coming to the end here, guys, if you please do. So in 1956, he was asked by an advertising agency called Benson's to do a poster for Guinness. You know what Guinness is. Great drink, Guinness. And when went to get the brief, and they said, I don't know if you know what the posters were like for Guinness before they changed, but there was a guy called John Gilroy, and he designed little animals and men holding girders and lots of animals all over the place advertising Guinness. So Abram got the brief, went home to his studio, sat with a big sheet of layout paper at his desk on a stool, couldn't think. He kept seeing these little pelicans and toucans jumping all over the place, and he thought, oh, I'd go and watch a cricket match. He was his own boss, so he could do what he liked. So he marched up the hill, jumped on a bus, always sat on the top of a bus because he could smoke, and he always carried bits of paper in his pocket. And this time he'd left the house so quickly, there was no paper. Then he, God, I've got no paper. But I have the bus ticket. And so this Guinness G was designed on the back of a bus ticket. He took his submission sketch to Benson's, and they said, where are all the other designs? And he says, I never do any of the designs. I'm the designer, you're the client. You've asked me to design a poster for you, and if you don't like it, go get another designer. I never do any other designs. And he never did any other designs because they would say, you do this. You have to be certain of your work. And if you're not, and you do this, or maybe this one, or maybe that one, they'll say, oh, we'll take a bit of this one. Why don't you do a bit of that one? Sorry, who said that? Yeah? So Abram always said, you know what a camel is, don't you? A camel is a horse designed by a committee. So it's, you know, he was the designer, and he was so sure of his work, and he never get another designer. So 5 months later, they wouldn't accept it. 5 months later, the phone rang, and the Bensons phoned him up and said, actually, we've plucked up the courage to show this to Guinness, and they're going to print it. It won 5 international awards. The poster that broke all the rules. In 2014, I was asked to submit, I was asked to give the post office in London some photographs of Abram in the studio. And I said, you do know he will be 100 in 2014, dead, but 100. And they said, you mustn't discuss this with anyone. You mustn't talk about why that we want to photograph. And so in 2014, they produced a set of stamps called Remarkable Britons. And Abram was one of the Remarkable Britons. He was the first designer to be honoured on a stamp. I was so proud. And he is in great companies with scientists and a spy and writers, Alec Guinness, and it's just fantastic. So he's on this stamp. And then a few weeks ago, we got this honour. I don't know if any of you know what a blue plaque is. So in London, in England, there's something called English Heritage. And if someone of importance has lived or worked or was born in a house, and they have to go through a whole rigmarole of proving that they're worth it, they get a blue plaque. You have to be dead for 20 years, but you get a blue plaque. So we kept my father's house and studio, and a few weeks ago we were so pleased that they put this blue plaque on the wall of my parents' house, and we ate it. This was we had a great big party afterwards, and I didn't make it, but we got this cake, and it was fantastic afterwards. So I don't know if there's time to show you the films. Is there? Would you like to see 2 short films? Very short. Amelia. So my father always lectured. He lectured a lot to students, and he always ended his lectures with the 3 C's. And he would say, it works now. Thank you. These are the 3 C's are qualities which are essential to designers. Courage, curiosity, and concentration. And then he always said to the kids, the students, don't forget cash and checks at the end of it. So this is the Kona Rex coffee maker, and it was shown at the Festival of Britain, and you put the methylated spirits in the bottom and the coffee in the top, and it's not touched by any metal, so it makes a great cup of coffee. And when we were kids, we were never allowed to wash it up because we always smashed it. But it was made after the war, so anyone got a clue what it was made from? It's a beautiful piece of form and function, actually. It's got this clip, and it's very heavy. Recycled Spitfires. Okay. So, Amelia, when we made this film, I had a very fussy, perfectionist friend who was making it with me. And he kept saying, no, it's not right. Go make another cup of coffee. And we made about 20 cups of coffee and shaking. Thank you. So this was the first moving BBC ident for the nascent BBC in 1953. And no one had ever seen anything other than people move on television. And this was the contraption made of piano wire and brass, and there was harp music behind it. And the day after this was shown to the public, there were letters of complaint, and the cartoonists had a field day, and they said the BBC are trying to hypnotise us. And they called it the Cockeyed Wonder. And they've been just the fantastic cartoons of it. So anytime there was an issue with Abram's work, the cartoonists had a great time. It was lovely. And he kept press-cutting books. We've got masses of press-cutting books. And then, you've been wonderful. That's it. Can I have my airbrush back, please?